It's 11 o'clock. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder on this beautiful Colorado spring morning, April 17th, 2022. My name is Sharon Belew, and I'm very pleased to be your worship leader this morning. We welcome all at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. All of you are welcome, all of you are sacred. Whatever your past was like, whatever the present moment is like for you, we invite you to journey into the future together. And welcome to everyone who is joining us via the magic of the internet. We are delighted that you're here. The congregation is all of us together, in person and online. If you're a new online visitor, you'll find a link to our visitor form in the video description, or send an email to the office and let us know how you found us. And now, I have two announcements to share. First, thank you to all who participated in the annual pledge drive this year. It was a big success, achieving 91% of our $400,000 goal at the close of our drive, April 12th. If you haven't yet made a pledge for the next church year, it's not too late. There's a link to the pledge form in your weekly email and extra pledge cards near the coffee after service. Second, if we emerge, as we emerge, not if, as we emerge. And after 2 pandemic years, I am excited to announce a new way to connect with each other, launching later this week. Now, this is news to me too. The UU Church of Boulder Google group is a place for members and friends to connect with each other, share information about community events, ask for help, probably help on how to use your Google Docs, share your celebrations, send invitations to social events and service opportunities. The group is opt-in, so look for an announcement later this week with more information and details on how to join. And now begins our service.
It is awfully good to be here with you on this beautiful morning. The chalice that will light in just a few minutes, the chalice that it's patterned after, is a cup of memory. It was a Christian communion cup once, the ritual holder of the memory of a prophet of peace, killed but not contained. A chalice is a cup of memory, which recalls that the dark red blood of our body is the same in each of us, and the distance between any of us is an illusion. A chalice is a cup of memory. The flame that we will light is the bright spark of mind and the warm love of our hearts and the transforming energy of our hands set to work in the world. Our chalice is a cup of memory still, because we will forget our vision and our values. We will forget our histories and our hopes. We will lose ourselves sooner or later in the blizzard of the world. And any chalice, any cup, any flame, any moment, any place can call us back home again to ourselves. To a moment like this, where we come alive again to who we are and who we are called to be. Friends, will you rise in body or spirit? Let's sing together.
Lo, the earth awakes again. Alleluia. From the winter's bond and pain. Alleluia. Bring relief and the flower and the spring. Alleluia. To adorn this happy day. Alleluia. Once again the word comes true. Alleluia. All the earth shall be made new. Alleluia. Now the dark cold days are o'er. Alleluia. Spring and gladness are before. Alleluia. Change then mourning into praise. Alleluia. And for dirges anthems raise. Alleluia. Our spirits soar and sing. Alleluia. Our hearts leap with the spring. Alleluia.
One of the things we do coming to church is to try to make complicated things simple and simple things complicated. One of the things we do is return to old stories and try to hear them with fresh ears, see them with new eyes. And in that spirit, I'll retell an old story this morning. Jesus was a great teacher and rabbi long, long ago who preached love. When we say in this church that part of our mission is to love always, we're not the first people to come up with this idea. He taught that we should care for the poor, that we should forgive people who hurt us. It's the kind of love, if you've ever seen like a little baby, like a little new baby, and you think this child is the most wonderful, beautiful, ridiculous, helpless, silly, noisy creature, that's the sort of love. That's the sort of love, unconditionally, unreservedly. And Jesus said, in essence, that sort of loving heart does not need to be constrained to the under 6 months old crowd. You can send that sort of love. And when he preached this message, people said, yeah, we do want to live like that. It's not about thinking or believing it. We want to live that way. 12 of them were called the disciples, and they traveled with him, listening to him preach day after day. But the rulers of his country were afraid that he'd lead a rebellion, and the people in power wouldn't be in power anymore. And so as Jesus became more popular, these leaders planned to kill him. One of his disciples, named Judas, betrayed and helped the leaders with their plan. The night before he died, he was celebrating the Jewish holiday of Passover with his 12 disciples, and the next day he was arrested and tortured and executed. The people who had followed him all this time were brokenhearted after he died. They struggled to understand why had their teacher been killed? What was the meaning in this? What was the purpose? Surely someone this good didn't deserve it. And as these men and women, because in the early church it was as much women leaders as men, as they gathered day by day in each other's homes, they remembered these experiences they had had with their teacher. They retold the stories of the times when he was wise, when he was kind, when he did baffling and surprising and unexpected things that they still had to wrestle with and figure out, what was this? Some of the people had dreams which seemed so real they couldn't tell if they had been awake or asleep when they saw him. And some declared positively they had seen Jesus again. He had talked with them, and the rumor spread that Jesus had come out of his grave, that 2 disciples had seen him, that several of the women had talked with him, and then he would mysteriously disappear again. And the people who had these experiences believed that Jesus was different from other people, so holy and great that he would come back to earth and save the world. And years passed by, and the people who knew him died, and their children and their children's children. And now, 2,000 years later, there are still many, many who hope he will come back. But others, like us Unitarian Universalists, believe that Jesus is not going to live again on earth. His body's not coming back. We're a faith that concerns itself much more with what he did when he was alive than meanings that might be spun from his death. But what we know clearly is that the things he taught did not die. When someone's physical body dies, the people around them who loved them and valued them keep their memories alive. When you lose someone you love, you remember the best of who they are, and you try to make that a piece of yourself. And the followers of Jesus remembered his teachings and his spirit and tried to make some of the best of him, part of them, long after his death. And we here today do too. Whatever beliefs that we might hold about what happened after he died, we do our very best to love always.
Well, this is a Girl Scout motto, didn't work this morning very well. Be prepared. Oh, that's great, thank you. Guess what time it is? It's the time to light the chalice. Let's see if that's going to, yep, that's going to start up. All right, so if you're joining us online and you have a candle or a chalice near your computer and a match, please get ready to light it. We invite you to type into the chat box where your chalice is lit, the street or the neighborhood, or what city if you're joining us from outside Boulder County. I'd like to now invite Phil Nicholson to come and light today's chalice. There you go.
Good morning. My name is Phillip Nicholson, and I joined this church about a year before the pandemic started. And I'd like to explain why. I grew up with a set of skills that often proved to be very useful. One, I always expected that things would go wrong, seriously wrong, without any warning. Two, I was always hyper-vigilant, searching for telltale clues that there might be a change. And underlying all that, I was reluctant to trust people unless I had good evidence that they were trustworthy. Now, I was tempted to have a show of hands, but I decided not to do that about this one. But I suspect some of you will recognize that the behaviors I've just described are symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder. And indeed, that's the case. But there's an irony here, which is that this kind of wary, detached, defensive stance is often proved to be very advantageous out in the world. But then I got older, I retired, I started working on projects that were kind of mine alone, so I spent a lot of time by myself. And I began to wonder if I might be missing something that would add more dimensions to my life. So I decided to do some experiments, and one of my first experiments was coming to this church. I was very impressed by the friendliness of the congregation, by the intellectual integrity of the service, so I kept coming. And I decided to up the ante, to join a small group, in this case, the senior salon. That also turned out to be a good decision, and I want to give you an example of what can happen in these small groups. The leader of the pre-pandemic senior salon invited a death doula to give us a talk. Now, I'd heard about birth doulas, but death doulas, what was that all about? And I didn't think I'd be interested anyway in hearing what she had to say about that subject, because I already had a plan. Before I became a weak, ailing, demented old man who had to depend on the goodwill of resentful caregivers, I planned to have in my possession whatever supplies I would need to choose the time and place of my death. But then the death doula gave examples from her personal experience of people with terminal diagnoses who were still able to find creative ways to live their lives, and even in those extreme circumstances. She described how caregivers and clients could interact in ways that were respectful and mutually enjoyable. She also pointed out that if you take your own life, even if it's for sensible reasons, your loved ones will inevitably feel they must have let you down. So after I heard the death doulist talk, I realized that I had to reconsider my former plans, that I had to learn to place more trust in other people. In other words, her presentation sort of was for me an awakening. Sorry. An awakening, and it gave me insights how I might go about living a more meaningful life. So I know that many of you here today and many online could testify to the ways in which your own lives have been enriched by what happens here. So in gratitude for this community of trust and spiritual awakening, I now light this chalice.
We now invite all of those gathered in your various locations to join together in fellowship and community as we all say aloud our congregation's covenant. Please stand. We gather in fellowship to speak truth to each other, to reach out and touch one another, to care with each other, and to seek the truth divine. So be it.
Friends, will you join me in a spirit of prayer and meditation, a time for listening, a time for wondering? Let's begin by all taking a breath together. I'll share some words for reflection, and we'll be together in silence to listen for what within or beyond you speaks. This by my colleague Victoria Weinstein, called Being the Resurrection. The stone has got to be rolled back from the tomb again and again every year. Roll up your sleeves. He's not coming back, you know. He's not coming back unless it is we who rise for him. We who lay healing hands on the reviled and rejected like he did on his behalf. We who rage for righteousness in his insistent voice. We who love the sinner, even knowing that the sinner is no farther off than our own selves. He will not be able to join us at the table to share that extravagant banquet, that love feast. All are invited. Come as you are. And so it is you and I who must feast for him. You and I who must say the grace and break the bread and pass it to the left, and dish up the broiled fish or pour the wine and pass it to the right, and treat each one so tenderly as though just this morning everyone we meet has made the personal effort to make it back from heaven or from hell, but certainly from death, to be by our side in this moment. Because if by some miracle, and why not a miracle, he did come back, wouldn't he want to see us like this? Wouldn't it be a miracle to live for just one day so that if he did, by some amazing feat, come riding into town, he could take a look around and say, this is what I meant. And we could say, it took us a long time, but we finally figured it out. We'll be together in silence for 7 breaths. Each week when we gather, we make time to weave our lives together. We make time to remember both the joys and the sorrows that we carry with us, and that it's not just us. We're not alone. We're surrounded by a whole company of people, each in their own struggles. And in ritual, we make that visible. We take a stone, a little piece of mountain, and place it in the sacred earth of this place, the sacred earth of the Ute and Arapaho people, remembering that each of our individual cares takes its place among everyone, held in the embrace of something larger than any of us. In just a moment, as the music begins, I invite you to come down, to take a stone and place it in the dirt, or if you're joining online, to share in the chat. It's not public, it won't be saved after the service. To share a joy or a sorrow that you carry with you today. Please. Brian Stevenson, some of you might know his work, spends his career challenging the justice system's bias against minorities, against the poor. He works in the courts, he writes, he lectures widely, educating, opening people's eyes up to where the justice system isn't just. He tells this story. He says, Brian Stevenson says, I was giving a talk in a church. An old guy in a wheelchair comes in. He's sitting in the back. He's staring at me. Older black man. I finish my talk. All the kids seem fine. But this older black man is just staring at me the whole time I'm talking. He has this really angry look on his face. He's really distracting me. When the kids go, this man comes up to me in his wheelchair. He has a kid roll him up to me. And he gets up in my face and he says, do you know what you're doing? And I look at him and I don't know how to respond. And he says it again, do you know what you're doing? And I step back and I start mumbling something. And he says to me, you're beating the drum for justice. And then he says, you keep beating the drum for justice. And it moved me. He grabbed me by my jacket, pulled me into his chair, turned his head and said, let me show you something, young man. You see this cut I have down here by the bottom of my neck? I got that cut in Greene County, Alabama, in 1963, trying to register people to vote. And then he turned his head. He said, you see this scar I've got by my ear? Freedom Summer, Philadelphia, Mississippi. He says, you see this dark spot? I got that bruise during the Children's Crusade, Birmingham, Alabama. And he looked at me. He says, people think I'm some old man in a wheelchair, covered with cuts and bruises and scars, but I'm going to tell you something. He said, these aren't my cuts. These aren't my bruises. These aren't my scars. These are my medals of honor. These are my medals of honor. You can transform your pain, or surely you will transmit it. Those words are from Father Richard Rohr, a Franciscan priest. He says, if we don't find a way to transform our pain, we'll always transmit it to those around ourselves or turn it in against us. And if your religion, he says, if your religion is not teaching you how to recognize, hold, and transform suffering, it is junk religion. It's a little bracing. I've heard at least a couple of times folks say, hey, Unitarian Universalism is an Easter faith with no Good Friday. A faith of boundless, ultimate optimism in the goodness of all things and hope for transformation. That's the Easter part. Without the dark night of the soul and the reality of suffering, which pierces and permeates every moment. That's the Good Friday part. But friends, let me clarify, lest you wonder if this is the case. We are not gathered in this house just to say nice things and think nice thoughts all the time. We are here in this house also to raise a lament. That old-fashioned word, lamentation, to raise to the sky a witness to the reality of suffering. To peel back all the false faces of the world that hide that fact. But lamentation is not despair. Our work is to hold lament in one hand and hope in the other, and not to guess at how or when or why which of these will win, but to walk through the world with sorrow and joy as our everyday companions. In the Christian tradition, in the story, Jesus sits down with his disciples knowing that he's going to be betrayed and abandoned to a horrific death alone, and still counsels them to love each other and the world all the same. Suffering and hope in each hand every day. We Unitarians believe the most important thing about the prophet and Rabbi Jesus is his life, the things he did, the things he taught. The religion he lived out, not the religion about him. The world of invitation. The world of justice that he and his people were rehearsing all through his ministry. One scholar says Jesus sought to prepare people for the inbreaking of the kingdom of heaven, for a messianic banquet, a party, a celebration among a mixed group of saints and sinners, tax collectors and patrons, women and men, faithful and doubters. And that message of his ministry was just the opposite of the world around him. He lived in a province of the Roman Empire where class kept people rigorously separated, where citizenship mattered about who you could talk to and who couldn't, who had rights and who didn't, where ethnic divisions cut neighborhoods, where your social location, where your job decided who counted as human beings and who didn't. If that sounds familiar, it's because not much has changed in 2,000 years. But in that moment, Jesus never once said, "Worship me," but he often said, "Follow me. Follow me, heal the sick, feed the hungry, care for the outcast, the widow, the poor. Build the kingdom here and now." There's a story in Luke's gospel on the way to Jerusalem, on the way to execution and death. Jesus stops to heal a blind man and welcome in a tax collector to hang out. Why, as the gospel is being put together, as the editors are deciding what the shape of that narrative, the arc of that story is going to be, why, as we journey towards Jerusalem, is there this side track about healing the sick and welcoming in the tax collector? Well, it's because one of the most important things that's going on is that everyone counts and everyone matters. Everyone is welcome in the beloved community. And the reality of suffering does not negate one tiny bit the reality of welcome and of human dignity. Jesus isn't attempting, as he arrives in Jerusalem, a political coup. He's not attempting in his ministry anything other than the radical and absurd establishment of beloved community right here and now on earth. A quality of experience, a way of living, which can be transformed and transformative no matter what happens in the power structure. Transformation starts with what we're doing, what we're acting, who we're welcoming, and that's the threat against empire. That's the threat against the status quo, which depends on haves and have-nots, a system which depends on some people being outsiders and some people being insiders, a system so insidious that often when we ask another person, "What do you do for a living?" what we're really asking is, "How much respect should I give you?" It's woven in deep, but empire only works if we treat our enemies badly. Empire only works if some people get respect and some people don't. The status quo only stays until we love our enemies and open our doors to empire's outcasts. And that work, that's what Jesus was executed for. There is no empire without enemies and iniquity. For us as Unitarian Universalists, this Easter story is a final parable for a rabbi who constantly talked in parables. And when you hear a parable, when you hear a myth, you don't first ask, did this really happen? You ask, what does this mean? Why does this matter? What in this is true, even if it didn't happen? What in this is true? Lament and hope hand in hand. What in this is true? That among broken and broken-hearted people, us, no one is left out of love, no one is less. what in this story is true: vision and reality hand in hand, knowing that failure is a fact of life, that suffering and death are facts of life, and nonetheless it is worth giving our days and our years away to love. Jesus then was a citizen of a country which did not yet exist and does not yet exist, trying to show what it looks like. That line, that image is from Dr. Vincent Harding. He was the first director of the MLK Memorial Center. He says, we, he means you, he means us, we, right here this morning in this room, we are citizens of a country that we still have to create. A just country, a compassionate country, a forgiving country, a multiracial, multi-religious country, a joyful country that cares about its children and its elders, that cares about itself and about the world, that cares about what the earth needs as well as what individual people need. He says, I am and you are a citizen of a country that does not yet exist and that badly needs to exist. And I want to offer you the opportunity to pledge deep that you're not going to give up this life without offering yourself to the creation of this country. He's speaking there about beloved community. He's speaking about what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven. And that message then, that truth, that call to hope did not die. The Greek statesman Solon says myth isn't about something that never happened. It's about something that happens over and over again. I don't believe in the fact of the resurrection, but I hear the truth of it when scars become medals of honor. And I don't believe in the fact of the resurrection, but I hear the truth of it in every call to make the beloved community real. And I don't believe he literally came back from the dead, but the message didn't die with the man. I hear it alive in Dr. Harding's words, pledging himself and inviting us to the creation of a country that does not yet exist. I hear it alive in Dr. King inviting us into beloved community. I hear it alive in the voice of that man in the wheelchair who says, you keep on beating the drum for justice. Lament and hope journey hand in hand. Resurrection, again and again and again. Amen.
Let's rise in body and spirit and join me, singing for the beauty of the earth. For
This month, we're sharing our plate with EcoCycle. And I'd like to read to you today about the legislative work that they've been doing. It's one thing for all of us to be doing our part as individuals to refuse single-use plastics and bring our own shopping bags. But EcoCycle knows that the single-use plastics crisis is systemic. And therefore, our approach to solving it must be systemic also. EcoCycle, along with our many partners, has made an unprecedented amount of progress in legislation in the last few years, including signing a landmark state bill into law less than a year ago. With the signing of the Plastic Pollution Reduction Act bill, Colorado became the first state in the U.S. to strike a plastics preemption law, restoring the right of local municipalities to enact their own plastic regulations. With the signing of this bill, Colorado became the 10th state to ban single-use plastic shopping bags in certain stores, and the 8th to ban foam food containers. EcoCycle and our partners championed Colorado's Plastic Pollution Reduction Act, along with concerned residents like you who contacted their legislators in support of this bill. In the words of our legislative director, Randy Moorman, passing the Plastic Pollution Reduction Act was exhilarating. It took us 3 years to get it to the governor's desk, and in 2021, our work paid off. We had a tremendous coalition of conservation and environmental justice groups working to bring awareness to the problem of plastic pollution, and hundreds of youth and Coloradans contacting legislators and testifying before committees late at night. We passed the second most comprehensive act in the country, second only to Vermont, and were the first to remove preemption, now allowing local governments to regulate plastic pollution. We can hardly believe how much legislative momentum we've gained over the last few years, and we can't wait to pass more historic legislation in Colorado and beyond. I invite you to give as generously as you are able. You can make a donation now using the link posted in our chat by sending a check to UUCB or scanning the QR code on the next slide with your mobile phone. Here, the ushers will pass the baskets. And may our gifts be used to enact justice, bringing peace and love to the Boulder community.
Now the green blade riseth from the buried grain, wheat that in the dark earth many days has lain. Love lives again, that with the dead has been. Love is come again, like wheat that springeth green. In the grave they've laid him, love by hatred slain, thinking that never he would wake again. Laid in the earth like grain that sleeps unseen. Love is come again, like wheat that springeth green. When our hearts are wintry, grieving or in pain, love's touch can call us back to life again. Fields of our hearts that dead and bare have been, love is come again, like wheat that springeth green.
good to be together on this beautiful morning. And in just a moment, I'll invite our online folks to gather in a Zoom room for fellowship and us to gather next door for the same. But before that moment, I'm remembering the story of a statue at a church in California. Statue of Jesus with arms outstretched where the hands were knocked off. So he's standing there with just wrists. And rather than replace them, the priest there instead put a plaque which said, "I have no hands in this world but yours." In that spirit, one hand holding lament and one hand holding hope, our worship ends and our service begins again. You rise in body or spirit, and we'll close in song.